Hi, everybody. It's 2:45. We're going to be getting started here with session 5 of our day today, but I did want to just show some of the information here. Quick little data call. If you haven't filled it out, please do. I will close it up in a little bit as we move into our next topic, but I just wanted to share it. So Bob, over to you. Actually, both Bobs. So I guess we got one speaking Bob and Bob controlling the slides. So Bob Roberge, please take over for the slide deck, and then we will Rich, I think you're muted. Go right ahead and introduce Bob for session 5.
Thank you, Alec. This is our session on supply chains. As we know, supply chain is the word of 2021 and maybe of 2022. We've had a lot of attack patterns in that domain for quite some time. And we're looking to improve upon that, given the fact that it's so important these days. Bob's going to talk about how supply chain attacks and CAPEC are related, and a little bit about MITRE system of trust. So take it away, Bob.
Thank you, and hello to everyone. Been a little while since I've been engaged with CAPEC, since I was the project leader way back when CAPEC started. Happy to talk about how the two can come together. So if you haven't heard of MITRE System of Trust, don't worry. It's something that's been emerging over the last couple of years and just now starting to come out on the stage of public sight. But let me dig into it and give you some backdrop. When you talk about supply chains, everyone definitely knows, the customer and their supplier. Often you don't have any visibility beyond that. Sometimes you can get a little bit of visibility into that next tier or the tier after, but it's notional and not very specific. But if we could actually expose and make that visible, there'd be so many things that are not currently really concretely addressable that could be. And one example of this you may already be aware of is in the software bill of materials arena, where understanding that software supply chain is a huge issue. But it's not just software, it's hardware and the general visibility into supply chains. A lot of people, when they talk about supply chains, tend to think about it in terms of the attacks and those intentional acts to disrupt or to take advantage of supply chains. I want to make sure you have on your table, when you think about supply chains, also those unintentional acts, those quality escapes, tainted goods, not through malicious means, shortages, weather disruptions, the whole coronavirus issue, a canal being blocked by a ship, lots of different things that can disrupt and open the door to attacks. For instance, the chip shortage from the coronavirus has led to counterfeit chips in several markets. So you need to think about this holistically. So the other part of supply chain is that there's some aspects of it that have been worked for eons. So, supply chain logistics, understanding, where things are coming from, sourcing it, inventory management, all those topics have been a part of human society for centuries. The whole idea of buying and acquiring, not new, but in a supply chain situation where you're talking about an organization, there's other aspects of it that come to bear that really fully head on hit supply chain. As more and more of the things we buy, acquire, install, use have software and network capabilities, the whole idea of managing cyber risk as part of supply chain has come to bear and is ever increasing. And then the actual, fact that your organization depends in some way on the things that come through the supply chain really fits into your organizational risk management picture. And one of the things that has really come to the fore in the last couple of decades, though, is the idea of a cyber supply chain. So these bring additional risks and additional levers to the whole situation. So all of this is context setting for what we are going to now talk about, which is MITRE's supply chain security system of trust. And then I'm going to wrap that into attacks and CAPEC. So system of trust is aimed to be widely adoptable, widely useful, and evidence data-driven way of looking at supply chain risks. So it's got frameworks, tools, hopefully standards will be involved, both it becoming part of a standard or a standard and leveraging standards. It's based on MITRE and its industry and government partners' insights into supply chain issues over the decades, as well as trying to learn for what we've been able to do here in MITRE in the area of bringing standardization and frameworks. Think CVE, CW, CAPEC, but also the attack framework, to bring groups of people into a more mature, more consistent, way of approaching a problem area. So I'm going to walk through this now. Now, when people start to think about supply chain, maybe that they bumped their knee on some issue and started worrying about this whole area, and so they start writing down all the things they can think about that need to be managed as part of their supply chain. Another approach that we've seen is somebody has been assigned or needs to do supply chain, and so they go borrow from some other effort that's been addressing supply chain. Both of these have issues with completeness, appropriateness. If you're borrowing from another project, they may have a totally different set of consequences from supply chain issues. They may have different technology, different vendors, different everything. And so borrowing from them may totally send you off in the wrong direction. So both of these are common practice approaches to setting up supply chain. And our goal is to minimize, if not eliminate, these. The other area, a lot of people, especially in industry, have heard about, talked about, and believe they're practicing third-party risk management. But when they deal with it, they may not be dealing with all the different aspects of it that really need to be addressed when you're talking about a supply chain and the risks from your supply chain. In addition, you need to think about attackers, counterfeiters. You need to think about natural hazards and disasters. You also need to think about human hazards. And so all of these things together come to the fore. And what we're trying to do in System of Trust is say, okay, if I need to trust my suppliers, my supplies and services, how am I going to achieve that in a responsible, repeatable, scalable way? And what we've come up with is 14 areas of risk that are pretty complete as far as we can tell, and common across industries and different areas of business and technologies and products and services. So these areas break into lots and lots of subcategories. And I'm just showing you one of them here, external influence. Now, external influence could mean you're worried that your supplier is being influenced by your competitor because they're also supplying them. And maybe your competitor buys more product from that supplier and therefore could influence things being available to you. Maybe they get the best goods. So those are the things you're worried about. Those are the risks. Now, when you think about companies working in the national security or critical infrastructure, then external influence can have a different spin. So we're trying to be comprehensive in that. And so you'll see a mixture of things here. And the point to note is not every one of these areas of risk is going to be appropriate to you, but you should start with that bigger picture and then winnow out the things that aren't appropriate rather than have different frameworks for different situations. So this is the picture of our top level of our risks. You can see it kind of has an attack framework look. But basically what I just walked you through is the far left column under supply risks, or supplier risks. So there's 7 areas, whether it's financial stability, organizational stature, susceptibility, culture, and so on. So when you think about CAPEC, well, where does it fit into this picture today? One example would be in the supply risks and the product security. So here's a couple of examples of attack patterns for supply chain that are really good match for product security. So the idea being that somebody can go find out information about your products that could allow them then to do attacks. Now, there are other areas here, just a couple here, in the cyber hygiene and practices could lead to somebody attacking into their networks, into their physical facilities, and then getting at the supply items. So these are the kinds of thinking we want to key up, look at them, and figure out where we can expand, where we can add in, and refine what's there. So to help do that, let's think about what is a supply chain. So you have a product. That product has components, subparts, and somebody has made that product by combining those subcomponents. So each of them, in fact, gets made either from other subcomponents or from raw materials. And you may have, contractual relationships between those organizations, ongoing, prime, sub, or it may be something that just happened through a retail outlet. So you got to think about all of those when you start thinking about where could the risk be, where's the attack surface in the supply chain. So CAPEC addresses several of these now for hardware supply chain attacks. And then the idea would be is, do we want to just continue with hardware of microelectronics, or do you want to go beyond to the physical devices and other aspects of products that come through a supply chain? So another example that I wanted to walk through is the software supply chain. So here you have source, you make it, it gets into a distribution package. There may be some iterative moving around through dependencies and updating libraries, and eventually gets to the customer. And this actual graphic is from the SALSA project, SLSA. It's part of a software supply chain effort to get a handle on, well, how can people attack this? And so they've gone and laid out the kinds of disruptions that can happen and where they happen. And CAPEC has also done a good job at getting a handle on these kinds of attacks against the software supply chain, which is kind of what you would expect, since CAPEC's, kind of meat was in the software area. But this kind of model, both this software and hardware one, are a little simplistic, because when you look at a real supply chain, it's got its raw materials. They get intermediate goods that may get further refined, that get manipulated into and assembled with others that then get distributed and go through a retail supplier and then to the consumer, and then of course retired. And these kinds of supply chains aren't just around town. They're international. Almost every product in every country has things coming from other countries because of the resources and skills and labor pool and lots of different things that are driving that. So when you think about this kind of additional detail, you need to think then, okay, I'm producing it, I have to distribute it. Somewhere there'll be a supplier that the customer actually gets to. And it's not even that simple, because it needs to move through this supply chain. And so the product goes materially through some kind of transporter, whether it's a car, a truck, a train, a ship, a plane, and it moves from location to location. And you don't just, send things because you think people are going to need it. You actually have, customers asking for things. You have producers coordinating, restocking shelves and such. And of course, there's money that gets paid. So when you start thinking about attacks against supply chains, all of these different aspects are open candidates to where a supply chain could be attacked. You could be going at the information flow in one way or the other, the money flow, the actual physical movement of goods through, loading docks and storage, facilities and railroad yards and so on. So there's a lot of these details that our current work in CAPEC doesn't capture and doesn't address directly. So I basically want to open up, the idea of where we could focus, what kinds of things we could talk about in expanding CAPEC to address these, and just to, open the discussion here. I've got a couple more slides to wrap up with, but this is where I really wanted to have the discussion. So if people have things they'd like to put in the chat.
We do have a question, Bob, that I'll just relay to you from the chat. One says, and it's open for your interpretation and response. We also have a hand raised in the lobby, so we'll go there next. But firstly, the question is, in the absence or opaqueness of supply chain information, how do we model the risk quantification reliably?
So one of the interesting things about supply chains, as well as in cyber, is that we have no statistics to really base probabilities on. So one of the approaches to deal with that is, what kind of indicators can you look for that would give you insight into whether a particular risk is actually manifest or not? So one of the things we're doing in our system of trust effort is moving away from a probability and impact math, and really focusing in on what things that you can find that would show that at risk is being mitigated or not present at all, and how can you make that concrete so that you don't have to be a subject matter expert to actually do that assessment. So the idea is articulate those in ways that a broader audience of people could follow those, and so that it doesn't take a supply chain expert to actually get a handle on these risks. Now, when it comes to the opaqueness specifically, that's where I think there's going to have to be a phase shift. I think people are going to have to demand insight into their supply chain. You already see this happening in software with the Sbomb, and I think you will see it very soon in hardware with an H-bomb. And so one of the efforts I'm involved with is bringing standards to that area, and the standard includes a core bill of materials. What do you need to know if you're going to actually maintain and build and distribute a bill of material? And then it's got additional information if it's a software bill of material or a hardware bill of material or a system bill of material, so that we can have some automation possible that scales and is consistent across these different area. Yes, the H-bomb, Adam. Yeah. Hopefully that addresses the question.
If you have questions, raise your hand or put them in the chat. I see Joe has his hand up.
Yeah, Bob, as a follow-on to that, very good presentation, gives an overview of the nature of the challenges that we have. But CAPEC is often used for, well, this is how it can be attacked. It'd be nice if it also included indicators of compromise that says it has been attacked or it has been compromised, so that we know if it's counterfeit, if it's tainted. And certainly the work with SAE G19A can lend itself to that. So it'd be nice if we kind of opened up the aperture of CAPEC of not just how, but indicators that something has happened.
Well, in fact, if you remember, and I'm sure you do, about a dozen years ago, we started efforts to see if the Cybox could be morphed to be a supply chain observables, because, you know, the talk was, well, this is counterfeit. Well, how do you know? Well, it's the logo's in the wrong place. Or, oh, this has been tampered with. Well, how do you know? Well, this tamper-proof seal has been broken, and or the shrink wrap is. So those are very easy to communicate, to record, but we don't do it in any automated way. So yeah, I think, you know, some way, and this goes along with the discussion about the probabilities. You know, if you're going to say yes, it has been tampered or it is a risk, you need some, you know, data-driven, observable or recording, something that can support, because when you start saying, okay, you're in violation of this contract, or I'm no longer do business with you, they're going to want to know, well, wait a minute, what basis? I'm going to take you to, you know, court.
You know,
so having a factual record of how you got there and supporting evidence is going to be critical.
Did someone else have their hand up? I thought they did.
Saw something go by in chat.
Yeah, okay. This is for Murthy. Issue. How do we guarantee integrity of Sbomb, H-bomb information provided by an entity? How do we ensure and enforce integrity of the information made available across entities in the supply chain? Blockchain? What other methods? The old
Not
blockchain.
necessarily blockchain, but so there, I don't have it in this presentation. I have it in a presentation I'm giving tomorrow. But basically, there's efforts to come up with ways of signing bombs. So the identity of the publisher has a verifiable mechanism. but also for the integrity of the document, and that you can then confirm through hashing and so on. So there's work in that area, but that doesn't then let you say, oh, it was also tested by this organization using this approach and technology. So a BOM of hardware or software is an attestation about the product, but you need other attestations. In the recent executive order 14028, it did put a requirement for software bills of material on federal suppliers, but it also put in a requirement being articulated by NIST about the attestations about that software. You know, why should we trust it? Now, those are starting out as self-attestations, but you know third-party attestations are going to be a requirement as well when you really need confidence, whether that third party be your agent or some independent lab or such. And so there are efforts in the Linux Foundation, the Open Source Security Foundation, part of Linux Foundation, to come up with standards for how to capture that in a ledger, not a blockchain ledger, but a distributed confidential ledger, a little lighter weight way of getting that kind of integrity. And so I think you'll find the industry is in the spring, early summer timeframe is going to start making SBOMs and attestations about the software captured by those SBOMs available to customers. And then if you're, have the right relationship, you can then see the details of those attestations. So big changes are going on in those areas. And so the idea here is to, help that along by articulating, what attack patterns, what kinds of evidence will help you, have assurance that has been addressed.
So there's a comment in the chats by Jim, which says, consider the Open Group Trusted Technology Provider standard that is now an iOS standard.
Yep. I may be a little
ISO
bit
standard, not iOS.
I was actually part of the team authoring that, and the Trusted Technology Providers standard, and Joe's Jarzenbeck, who is on, is very familiar with it, basically is about malicious taint and counterfeits. It doesn't address some other risks about good quality product. And so it's a part of what we want, I think, as an industry, but it's not addressing all of those areas. Trying to get them to open that standard up and expand it so that it's got a closer match to what the risks that we talk about in system of trust, but that story is still unfolding.
Okay, Jim has I think a response. Open source software is pervasive in COTS software supply chain. Have you considered publishing recommended security practices and measuring for development of open source software?
So
not to that, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I just brought up the chat, so I read it. So the effort, the Open Source Security Foundation, OSSF, where the work I was talking about is happening, has a big focus on the open source that is the underpinning of much commercial capabilities. And so that group is also the one that's putting in a scorecard that can rate open source projects, badges that can, rate projects and those doing the work. So yes, there's a general set of attention being paid to not only the flow of how do I gain assurance, what is in the software I'm using, but also how do I gather the information I need to figure out if it's a risk that I can't accept. And that goes, for different organizations, those risks may known vulnerabilities, but it also could be I can't deal with people from those organizations being involved in that software. So all of this kind of information, it depends on your risk aversion, what areas of risk you're focused on. And so being able to make it visible and available is the key, not coming up with, oh, here's the approved products list, because what criteria you use to make that list may be totally inappropriate to another organization and be missing things that they're really interested in, and is key to their ability to make decisions about what to bring into the enterprise.
We have another comment here by Aiden. For supply chain and attacks in general, I think it is important to look at the effect of an attack in terms of how it either obtains information, resources, gains control of a particular process, or how it alters, disrupts, destroys the behavior of the supply chain process. Aiden, is this a continuation? You have another blurb
Yes, it
in
is.
chat. Okay. So continuing on, it says supply chain process to the end of getting an understanding of how a given attack provides leverage to the attacker against the system or the supply chain.
Yep, totally agree. And that's the scope of the things we're trying to make people aware, make them understand, and when it comes to system of trust, we have this huge, taxonomy of the risks that could be coming from your suppliers, your supplies, or the services you're making use of. And it's that rubric you just went through that lets you narrow down to those that are really going to be impactful, that are appropriate to the technologies and the practices and processes you're talking about in your supply chain. And so the magic, as it were, of System of Trust is our framework is going to be online and available and being managed in a cloud capability that people can go in and basically build a profile that does that subsetting and then leverage that result so that we can have the huge coverage, but then narrow it down appropriately and quickly so that for your particular supply chain problem, you'll have a workable size set of risks to evaluate and manage. So just to finish the slides I have here, basically in the past we've talked about physical movement of goods and these discrete different activities and players, and as now we need a lot more information about the bills of materials, the quality, the pedigree, the provenance, and it's a two-way direction. Not only does the customer need these things, but each leg in the supply chain needs information from the other participants. And it's not just, hand off and forget. So in our work in System of Trust, we're going to be coming out with ways everyone can get a handle on this, can make use of it. It'll be publicly available. There'll be standards. There'll be training materials. I'll be giving a talk at RSA in June on this in the supply chain track, and we'll be licensing the application we're going to have available so that organizations could bring it in-house and use it themselves. So there's a bunch of material out there already about these things, system of trust, and all these slides will be available. And also the SOT@MITRE.org is a live email, even though SOT.MITRE.org isn't going to be launched until just before RSA.
Okay, that was really terrific as usual, Bob. Any more questions for Bob or anything about supply chain? We're running a little early, but since it's the last session, I think we can go right into it.